information about how to become a friend of the library, visit tulsalibrary.org/friends. If you have any questions throughout today's program, please feel free to put those in the chat. Our speaker will be answering audience questions at the conclusion of her presentation. I did want to let everyone know that we will be recording today's presentation, so it will be available later on via the library's YouTube channel. And now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Hilary Kitz. A native of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Miss Kitz has lived and cooked in Tulsa for over 40 years. She trained in the cooking school run by Madeleine Kamman in Boston many years ago. She worked in the office of Tulsa Mayor Susan Savage and then ran a political campaign consulting business. Miss Kitz now spends her summers in Nova Scotia, where she has a large vegetable garden from which she cooks delicious meals. Please join me in welcoming Hilary Kitz. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, for that very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to thank everyone involved with Books Sandwiched In and the whole Tulsa City County Library system, to which I am a devoted admirer. And thank all of you for logging on today. So, Save Me the Plums by Ruth Reichl is a charming book. Look how attractive the jacket is. It'll be backwards, I guess. But it's very nicely laid out, nice picture of a plum on the front, watercolor of the plum on the front. And the title, of course, is from one of our favorite poems by Carlos Williams, which I will now read to you. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. It's a lovely poem and a perfect title for a book. The subtitle says My Gourmet Memoir, and she doesn't mean personal eating, she means the magazine. The book is about Reichel's tenure as editor-in-chief of Gourmet magazine. And the book opens with memories of Reichel's introduction to the magazine as a young girl, followed by some adventures in eating and cooking with her family growing up in New York. Many of these stories were expanded by Reichel into the 8 books she's written, some of which I've read, not all, and I think one of them's a novel. So if you've read the books, some of these stories and her family will be familiar. After university, as a young woman, Reichel moved to the West Coast, to Berkeley, and continued her interest in food by working in restaurants and writing about food in small alternative newspapers. At one point in this adventure, she had a revelation about the imminent arrival of a great new food fad, Thai food. So on a trip back to New York, she pitched the idea to an editor at Gourmet and was summarily dismissed. On that occasion, she tells us, she was wearing a hand-crocheted green chenille suit. The editor had on white gloves. Reichel went on to edit the food section of the LA Times and then became the restaurant critic for the New York Times. Suddenly, out of the blue, she had an invitation to go to tea at the Algonquin Hotel with the editorial director of Condé Nast to talk about Gourmet magazine. This is the first inkling of her new career, and she describes her host this way. Waif like James Truman, could this man really be in charge of Vogue? His hair needed cutting and his rumpled clothes looked as if he'd slept in them. This is one of many descriptions that are not altogether flattering of the people whom she meets. He asked her what she thought of Gourmet, and she told him that the magazine put her to sleep and that it was for rich people to plan their vacations. But he wasn't dissuaded. He'd done his homework, read her pieces about food, and told her she would make an excellent editor for Gourmet. Reichel protested. She'd never managed a staff, certainly not a staff of 60. And as she says, I was still a 60s rebel with a deep distrust of corporate ways. So that's the heart of this book. The next meeting is with the owner of Condé Nast, which owns a whole lot of expensive, fancy, glossy magazines, Cy Newhouse. Again, there's not a very flattering description. Here's what she says about Cy. Now, watching Cy shamble through the celebrities at the city's most expensive trattoria, Da Silvano, curiosity was winning. No one, I thought, would have taken him for one of the world's richest men. The great media mogul was small, wizened, and dressed in an ugly olive drab sweatshirt. He had a long, horsey face and gaps between his teeth. When I stood to greet him, he motioned me down with jerky little gestures of the hand. Again, it's not a very flattering description. As Reichel considers the offer to take the job, she thinks back to her Berkeley days before she went to at the LA Times. And then all of a sudden, food names start dropping all over the place. She doesn't identify the books or the restaurants associated with these names, assuming the reader is familiar enough with the food scene. For instance, her friend Marion sends her to Marion's astrologer. I'm not sure you know who you really are, dear. This is Marion Cunningham. She said it gently. That Marion Cunningham who edits the Fanny Farmer cookbook. MFK Fisher said, you must go. Well, MFK Fisher is like the doyen, the most fantastic food writer America has produced, except maybe A.J. Liebling, but a wonderful food writer, wrote a whole lot of books, including How to Cook a Wolf. Alice Waters from Chez Panisse asked incredulously, are you really going to work for corporate America? And Cecilia Chang, who owns and ran the Mandarin restaurant in San Francisco, adds her voice to the chorus. Of course you will take this job. So these are memories of how her friends urged her to try something new when she was leaving Berkeley years ago. Reichel's agent, we had no idea she had an agent, and I presume it was her book agent, explains that the gourmet publisher, Gina Sanders, is married to Cy Newhouse's nephew. So it's all connected. That's the next meeting. And here's what she says. Gina Sanders made me think of a character in a children's book, a sleek little fox dressed in grown-up clothing. Sanders was in a conservative gray suit. Reichel was wearing a vintage velvet coat with a narrow waist and full skirt and old boots, which the melting snow had caused to squeak with each step. There are a series of these interviews, and finally she's offered a huge amount of money for the job. Her son, Nick, who at the time she took the job was about 11, was really encouraging her because he thought she would then be home in the evenings rather than out reviewing restaurants every night for the Times, which she'd been doing. Site at Gourmet, which has planned extravagant new offices. So she's shown the plans and told she, of course, she can do all the decoration she wants. And she mentions she's glad to see there's a table in her office. It would be so useful so they could have lunch. And of course, she's told very delicately that there was, of course, a dining room. And as she says, the price of that table covered the cost of every stick of furniture I owned. She's stunned to have her own bathroom instead of the ladies' room at the Times where, quote, toilets leaked, the fluorescent lights hiccuped, and broken towel dispensers trailed paper across a cracked floor, end quote. Nice descriptive writing. That's really great. Next, she meets the staff. She's completely tongue-tied and can't speak for an entire 3-minute hiatus. And then they start asking her questions and sort of encourage her to start immediately, which she had not intended to do. Suddenly, there are a whole lot of new expressions she's never heard before. Tiosi, things like, I'm a wizard with inadequate sep, and we need to enlarge our well, to which Reichel had replied, well, good water is so important to a cook. Also, she has trouble with adjacency. She was very worried that she didn't speak this new magazine language. Inadequate sep is a way to separate advertisers within the magazine. TOC is TOC, table of contents. And then there was another one, Yaffe. She goes to the trial kitchens and they're working on something over and over again. And they keep saying, oh, but it's only for taffy. It's only taffy. And that turns out to be the Yaffe. That was the You Asked For It column, which has recipes from restaurants. Readers would send in requests for recipes from restaurants they'd enjoyed. Of course, the restaurants wouldn't give them the recipes, but the restaurants would give the recipes to Gourmet. And then Gourmet had to test them over and over again. She does more of these descriptions. She met Paul Goldberger at the airport. He'd been the culture editor at the Times then. But listen to her description of Goldberger. With his pale skin, small nose, and soft mouth, he always made me think of an extremely dapper rabbit. He was, as usual, beautifully dressed. I just don't know if this is flattering or not. And then there's another, whoa, name dropped. Marcella is dying to meet her. Marcella Hazen's a wonderful Italian cookbook writer. And then she meets her managing editor. I'm quoting, he was a tall, thin stork of a man who stalked into my office, disapproval etched into every line of his body. His head was small, the hair so closely cropped you couldn't help noticing his small, compact ears. His face bore so few distinguishing characteristics. I thought that if you tried to describe him, you would end up noting his impeccable posture and that he was very clean. As we move along, there are more names dropped, but now only first names that we all are supposed to recognize. Julia and Jacques and Marcella again. Coming from a newspaper, she was used to fact checkers, copy editors, and photo editors. Gourmet had none of those. The cooks were called food editors, and they worked in some 5 gorgeous kitchens, huge, where they would test a recipe as many as 19 times. Reichel gets over her newness and does have a lot of good ideas and energy, and it turned out that the talented staff there did as well. The place started humming with these new writers, new columns, and special issues. As she says, the staid magazine, which had always operated at a stately pace, was now speeding along in a constant state of flux. She hired an amazing managing editor who brought in a new copy editor, quote, a skinny Brit with bad teeth and a shaved head, dressed almost entirely in leather and enveloped in a cloud of invisible smoke, end quote. Not sure what that last part means. But if I were his child or partner, I'm not sure the description would make me happy, but she does go on to say what a terrific talent he was. The magazine thrives, but she realizes her primary job is to woo advertisers to keep it afloat. Finally, we get to hear about some amazing food when she's lunching with Mr. Lauder of Estee Lauder at Jean Georges. There's a lovely description of lamb's quarters. Spinach with a college education, bright green, slightly spicy, very intense. It was served with a little hash of hazelnuts and crab to coax out all the flavors. She goes on, and I can never resist Jean Georges. He poaches it in sweet wine until the texture is unlike anything you've ever experienced. So fragile, like eating clouds. It goes well, but Reichel was used to a firewall between advertisers and editorial. She does hire a brilliant, unconventional art director, and everything becomes much brighter and more interesting visually. There's a long description of a great hullabaloo struggle to win approval to photograph a handsome chef holding a beautiful 6-foot tilefish. I love this image. Reichel was, this was to go on the cover. Reichel was willing to bet $100 that it would outsell the previous year's October cover. But Truman, the managing editor, hated it. You can't put a dead fish on the cover. That fuss went all the way up to Cy Newhouse, the owner. She won her bet. But still, there was the fancy Manhattan part of the job. Reichel was invited to Cy's birthday. This was a yearly event. All the elegant editors were there. Again, no last names. But she said the last time she had seen Anna, that's Anna Wintour from Vogue, quote, she'd been dressed in a silky teal dress, trimmed with gray puffs of fur that looked so soft, I wanted to reach out and pet them. On her feet were tall, butter-colored suede boots that would surely dissolve with the first drop of rain. So she's obviously worried about what to wear. And knowing that the other editors would be there. And here's how she talks about them. She just gives them one name, Anna Grade and David Page. And we're all supposed to know that it's Anna Wintour from Vogue, Graydon Carter from Vanity Fair, David Remnick from The New Yorker, and Paige Rents from Architectural Digest. All expensive, glossy, Condé Nast magazines. Their surnames are never given. She's told she has to have a driver, which she has never had before, to take her from the museum where the movie is held. That's the first part of Cy's birthday every year, to the apartment where the dinner is held. Everyone takes a bus, which Cy provides, except the hotshot editors. So she meets her new driver, Mustafa, whom she grows to love and rely on completely. They do a great, big, expensive Paris issue. So she's off to Paris, staying at the Maurice and first class travel and all of that, and absolutely incredible food. So I'm going to read a little of that. When the driver who picks me up at the Charles de Gaulle takes me straight to lunch at Pierre Gagnère, I do not refuse the crystal flute the waiter hands me. I watch the bubbles drift lazily to the top, inhale that fine aroma, grapes, yeast, and age, and take a sip. Pow, the champagne zooms straight to my head. A crimson sorbet arrives, cradled in a small glass dish. I dip in a spoon, and a tumble of tomatoes, herbs, and horseradish, terrible in its cold tartness, assaults my mouth. The sorbet buzzes against my tongue, shocking me into the moment. One more bite, and I'm experiencing the food with psychedelic intensity. A tiny onion tart, no bigger than a fingernail, is crowned with a single bright nasturtium. I stare at the blossom, thinking this is the most beautiful food I have ever encountered. Airy puffs of pastry and fold bits of fish and slices of caramelized apples that crunch and crackle merrily inside my head. Adorable shrimp dumplings nestle into leaves of lettuce, the sweet pink meat peeking slyly from each jade wrapper. The flavor is delicate, tender, and so seductive, I want to keep it in my mouth forever. But then I lift my glass and take a sip of cool white Burgundy, the Corton Charlemagne. Is so pure, I imagine water trickling down a mountainside. I take another sip and then another of this gorgeous, heady wine. Gagnère's tribute to surf and turf arrives. Delicate black caviar, pressed into a thick, fruity saline jam, paired with foie gras that's been transformed into a trembling, almost liquid substance. I close my eyes and feel the flavors somersaulting through my mouth, a circus of sensations. This is followed by lacquered duck skin with shiitake, lièvre à la royale, the most decadent hare, served in 3 courses, and finally a cascade of desserts ending with a single prune stuffed with licorice root in a bitter sauce of caramel and quince. The insane flavors linger in my mouth, a tantalizing welcome. So this is the high life that she's leading and loves it. But all of a sudden it's 9/11, 2001, and everything in New York, of course, is cut down. She's quite close. Her offices are quite close to the ground zero. And they swing into action at Gourmet. The 5 kitchens are filled with chefs who volunteer to come and provide chili and cornbread for first responders. They're part of a movement where the food industry raises $25 million to help. Having the chefs in the building gives her an idea to give a monthly chef party, which begins at midnight when the chefs leave their restaurants, and they come over to Gourmet and provide these, taking turns, provide these wonderful meals. So she gets to see the sort of inside of the competition and friendship. The magazine decides to become a little more accessible, and they decide to include a recipe, for instance, for sloppy joes. Of course, it takes them 5 intense iterations to get them right. And then they print a cover with cupcakes, and the outcry lasts for months. The readers are horrified that the haute in haute cuisine has been discarded and that Gourmet has slumped to some sort of banal level of food. But Reichel was a fearless editor and a great admirer of good writing. She'd persuaded Pat Conroy, Calvin Trillin, Richard Ford, Ann Patchett, and Julian Barnes all to write for the magazine. And now they were going to send David Foster Wallace to Maine to write about lobsters. Wallace had turned down suggestions for expenses paid trips to Scotland and to Rome, but he accepted this one. Let me read some of it. It was really long when it arrived, something like, it was even heavier, a big hefty manuscript. Okay. Perusing the first page, I began to laugh. At his best, David Foster Wallace is wonderfully funny, and this was a gem. He began by offering up the tangled history of Maine and lobsters. He discussed hard-shelled lobsters and soft ones, noting that the festival was prepared to offer you a lobster dinner for little more than a meal at McDonald's. There was one snarky aside in which he opined that the editor of another Epicurean magazine, who'd labeled this one of the best food-themed festivals in the world, might not have spent much time sampling its delights. But he glided gracefully on to note that because lobsters are still living when they go into the pot, they are the freshest food there is. Here he paused to consider a question. Is it all right, he asked, to boil a sentient creature alive just for our gustatory pleasure? Soon he was delving into the science of pain and the ethics of death, the unstoppable torrent of words that went on for pages. At one point, he referenced the infamous Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. At another, he noted, it appears to me unlikely that many readers of Gourmet wish to be queried about the morality of their eating habits in the pages of a culinary monthly. Thanks, I muttered, as Wallace proceeded to question said morality for a few thousand more words, moving from lobsters to the entire animal kingdom. Would future men, he wondered, someday look back at our eating habits in much the same way we viewed ancient Aztec sacrifices? He ended by asking this, after all, isn't being extra aware and attentive and thoughtful about one's food and its overall context part of what distinguishes a real gourmet? Or is all the gourmet's extra attention and sensibility just supposed to be aesthetic, gustatory? So there was a fuss, of course, about that, publishing that, but she stuck with her writer, and it was a great success. It was brave to publish it, and it worked out. Hundreds of people wrote in support. So soon they started publishing other essays. Junot Diaz's essay about his love for Asian food was inextricably linked to his yearning for his absent father. Articles took on deeply personal, edgy, uncomfortable truths about our relationship to food. There was an article which began, if you've ever eaten a tomato this winter, chances are very good it was picked by a person who lives in virtual slavery. Then suddenly, and this is after the 9/11, Townsend, pale blue eyes and windburned cheeks, he was an upscale version of every elk and Shriner in the nation. I'm not sure, is this a fine quality or a sneer? Townsend questioned everything. He was a real finance person. The use of analog versus digital film, paper quality, all the small expensive differences that had been taken granted before. And other more creative editors started packing their bags. And the numbers which had been going up had peaked and were beginning to slide. Internet was coming, of course, on-site food sites. All the gourmet recipes began to be posted on Epicurious, a food site. And so that was hard for the gourmet food editors, since the other recipes on the site came from less scrupulously tested sources. But suddenly Cy Newhouse, the owner of Condé Nast, who'd opposed a gourmet website, changed his mind, and the team was off and running. They were setting up to start with a daily short cooking lesson called Soup Opera, and they would have a daily blog called Diary of a Foodie. But the bad news was that the recipes were still not going to be on their own website, but were going to go to Epicurious. The run-up to this website was very expensive. As it was, their kitchen budget was huge. There were salaries for 12 cooks, 3 dishwashers, a photographer, and a photographer's assistant. The actual food costs were over $100,000 a year. And then they were going to hand over their recipes for free. So the website startup storm is brewing, and in the middle of it, Reichel goes to an Italian bakery and writes this description of a bread she likes. When you picked up a knife and sheared off a slice, A mysterious fragrance came floating out that made you think of a forest on a sunny day in fall. Then, for 2007, she was named Editor of the Year. Big parties and celebration. But before she could really celebrate, she found that her publisher was leaving. It was another blow. Every year they would have a birthday party at some restaurant that was for Gourmet's birthday. So this final one was at Boulot Bar just before it opened. And Daniel Boulot really put on a show. And I'm going to read you the food from that party. The journey began in the wine room. I stopped to sample a mushroom risotto ball that crackled in my mouth, leaving a haunting earthy flavor in its wake. In the bar, a chef stood beside an entire leg of Serrano ham, holding the delicate black hoof in one hand as he carved with the other. These Iberian pigs stuffed themselves on acorns. As I bit into the sheer, rosy slice, I imagined I could taste nuts in the soft, lacy fat at the edge of the meat. In the next room, Daniel had set out salmon in a dozen different preparations. There were also little pink shrimp in bright billows of garlic-splashed aioli, and octopus smoked until the lavender flesh was smooth as velvet. A chef pulled fish and chips from a vat of merrily bubbling oil, setting it on a small square of paper, showering it with salt, and handing it to me. Burning hot, the crisp golden batter shattered to expose a cool white sesame soft flesh of the fish. I held out my hand for another. The trail wound through pâtés, foie gras, tiny game pies, and rabbit terrines, each more seductive than the last. Upstairs, the eclairs waited, long pastries bursting with pralines, chocolate, mocha. Scattered among the sweets were small scoops of grapefruit sorbet topped with white chocolate. The ice was spare and tart against the voluptuous sweetness of the chocolate, shocking you to attention. Really, the food writing is just a huge delight. But the 2008 recession was just about to hit the magazine world very hard. Some of the biggest glossies folded, and the next few chapters of the book are just a snowball of catastrophes. So they decided to do another Paris issue, but Paris on a shoestring. And here's what they ate then. Just more great food writing. So they're in a moderately priced restaurant, quite a shoestring price, not moderately, moderate to low price. And they found just the right one. With a wild taste of lakes and forests. Bill's scallops, still in their pretty pink shells, sizzled with butter, sending the delicious whiffs of bacon, garlic, and thyme shooting across the table. You must have the rice pudding. It was on every table. Rich, creamy, scattered with dried apricots and raisins, it was an extraordinary concoction, a dish more of yesterday than today, with a dollop of creme anglaise. So, every 5 or 6 years, they would publish the best of Gourmet in a book, and they'd got a great big advance, over $1.5 million for the publication of the second best of Gourmet that they'd done since she'd been there. And she was on a book tour in Portland, Oregon, and suddenly got a telephone call to return immediately to New York the next day. At a big table, Cy Newhouse announced that the magazine was closing, just like that. After 10 years at the helm, she was out. She missed the luxury, the driver, the helpers, having to deal with her own health insurance, and the 65 talented people with whom she had worked. That's pretty much the end of it, but within the book, there are some recipes. I tried several of them, some better than others. The best is one I can tell you about, and you can remember it, or if you want to go grab a pencil and paper, you can write it down. It's a pretty simple dish that she makes when she comes home late one night and her son is hungry and tired. So it's basically noodles in a black bean pork sauce. I just buy regular rice noodles at the grocery store and pour boiling water on them and let them sit in a bowl. And then you need 2 kinds of black bean sauce. And I buy these at Nam Hai at 21st and Garnett, for those of you who live in Tulsa. You need 1 tablespoon of the black bean sauce with chili and 2 tablespoons of the black bean sauce with garlic. And then you add a teaspoon of sugar. You mix those 2 together and you add a little bit of sugar. You take about an inch of finely minced ginger and saute that in a pan. Add some white parts of scallions and mix that in with the pork. And brown the pork on top of the ginger. Just, get it as not gray, get it gray, not, cook it. Then add the sauces, add the noodles, and sprinkle the top with the green parts of the scallions, which you've cut on a slant. Pretty simple and really delicious. So this book tells you a lot about the personalities of gourmet and the complex world of magazine publishing. With magazines facing an interesting crossroads now, I wonder how many will last. I was a Gourmet subscriber for most of those years, even had those binders and indexes. I loved the writing and the dedication to high quality. The only thing I would say is that this book does not offer very much about the business side. I mean, what was the circulation when she started? What was the circulation at its peak? How much did it cost? Was the subscription money more than the advertising budget? How much was a loss every year? None of that was mentioned. However, it's a real adventure story. The book is charming, it's energetic and personal, and I would recommend it to anyone interested in food. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Hilary. That was really interesting. I'm hungry now. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions for Hilary? Feel free to put those in the chat. Okay, Jane asked, do you have a go-to dinner recipe?
Oh, Jane. You know what? I actually, a rack of lamb is my, you mean like for a dinner party or just a dinner? Did you say dinner party or just dinner? I can't see the.
Just dinner.
Just dinner? Well, I like that noodle recipe, noodles and black bean sauce and a little ginger. But if I'm having guests, I like to do a carrot soup, and then a rack of lamb is easy peasy. It takes no time at all. I also, really quick, generally, when we just did this last night, I put and drop a chicken in for 45 minutes, a whole chicken, and a roast chicken is pretty wonderful. I don't know. You can call me Jane anytime.
Someone wants to know if there are recipes in the book.
Yes, there are. There's a chocolate cake recipe, which was not that tremendous. There's one for biscuits, scallion biscuits, which sound okay. I've got biscuits right now. I'm trying a yeast biscuit today. I've never tried that before. Some of them are better than others. That's all I would say. I think that noodle one is by far the best, and it's really good.
I'll ask a seasonal question. Do you have a favorite Thanksgiving side dish? And do you have a go-to recipe for it?
I don't think you can ever go wrong with a potato gratin. And I mean, sometimes it's called scalloped potatoes. And I use the New York Times cooking website a lot, and there are a bunch of them there. I don't have any problem cooking the potatoes a little bit beforehand in some milk and cream, because otherwise it takes a long time and sometimes your cream will separate. So that's what I do.
Sounds yummy. Tara wants to know, are the recipes that are in the book all from Gourmet, or are they her personal recipes?
I think they're all from Gourmet, although I don't really think she says. That's a good question. And of course, there's no index of the recipes, which would have been nice. Some of them are, and some of them are actually from cafes, but I think that, for instance, the noodle one isn't. The jewel chocolate cake one, which I found, is from Cafe Mezzo, which is on the West Coast, outside LA. The Gina Marie's cheddar scallion biscuits, that's from Gourmet. So not all of them, but some of them.
Gotcha. Okay, Jane wants to know, is there something you avoid cooking, and does Reichel have any food she avoids?
No, she doesn't talk very much about cooking herself. She talks much more about eating. And that's what I like best about the book, the way she describes the food. Is there anything I'm not a tripe. I don't cook tripe. But other than that, I'm just about everything else.
Let's see. Any other questions from the audience? Do you know what Reichel is doing now?
No, I have no idea. And I don't really know how to find out. I did look her up, but I don't know. Good question.
Someone wants to know, have you kept your copies of Gourmet?
I don't think so. I'm sure that they went in some move or something. I don't know. I don't have them anymore. But all the recipes I'm sure are still online at Epicurious. So, and those are all free and open for anybody. I once cooked an entire Indian meal from Gourmet, although I have favorite Indian cookbooks, and that meal was really good. And I would sort of like to do that again.
Okay. Someone from the audience wants to know if, I guess they want to know if Reichel's tenure at Gourmet was before or after The Devil Wears Prada book came out, which is
Oh yeah.
Anna Wintour.
Oh, it was before.
Okay.
Yeah, because she left in 2008.
Yeah.
No, yeah, 2008. I mean, just when the recession hit, maybe a little bit after that. Yeah.
Sue-Ann from the audience wants to know how you organize your recipes and cookbooks.
Oh yeah, great. I try every so often. I make binders of the recipes that I'm cooking most often and then I look and I have all these binders and ones that I never look at. It's just simpler to go online and print one off. So my cookbooks are the ones I use most frequently are in the kitchen. Some other ones are in the study. I have another bunch in Nova Scotia. Organization, not so much.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the difference, or is there a difference between the foods commonly eaten in Canada and Nova Scotia versus the US?
It's an Atlantic province, so it has a history of fishing. So on the menu there, in almost everywhere, there's chowder, fish cakes, lobster in various forms, if you can afford it. But in the early days in Nova Scotia, lobster was so cheap that it was embarrassing for children to take it to school as a sandwich. So I would say in Canada as a whole, it's a huge country. So in Quebec, of course, there's a much more of a French tradition, and the tourtière, which is a Christmas Eve ground pork with potato on top thing. It's different everywhere. Much more of an Asian influence in British Columbia. It's a big country.
Okay, let's see. Do you make handwritten notes in your cookbooks? Perhaps to remind yourself of what baking dish to use or longer cooking time?
Sometimes, yes, sometimes I do. Yes, quite often I do, because sometimes the cooking times are crazy. I have a secondhand commercial range both in Nova Scotia and here, and I know that my stovetop is hot and my oven's a wee bit slow.
Let's see. Do you purchase most of your ingredients locally, or do you order them from other places?
No, I do quite well here. I occasionally, if I need something, when I started cooking from those Ottolenghi books, a friend cooked an Ottolenghi dinner for me once, my friend Phoebe, and I was I was away and running. And so those books have a lot of ingredients that are slightly, I get some of those online, rose harissa and some kind, special preserved lemons and yeah, sumac. But actually I can get all of those in Tulsa now.
So we're about out of time. We do have one other question that we can address. Where do you land on the gas range versus electric range debate?
Oh, I'm wholeheartedly gas. I hate cooking on electricity. Yeah. But you do what you can.
Yes. That seems to be the favored.
Well, we're lucky in Oklahoma, but gas is much less available in other parts of the country.
Well, I did want to say thank you for speaking with us today. You're a wonderful reader. I loved listening to you.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll come back for a future book sandwiched in.
Yeah, I was a book sandwiched in board member for years and years in the 80s. I think
Wow,
I may have even chaired it. I'm not quite sure.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone who came today to the program. As I mentioned before, this is the last in our series for the fall, but we will be back later next year. So keep an eye out for those dates. And I hope everyone has a very happy, safe, and tasty holiday. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, blue, isn't that nice?